Haidong! In this video, we're going to cover basics, part 6. So last time we introduced the idea of chianse, so let's dive a little bit more into it, right? So what we just did before was talk about the muscle groups as we move. Again, keep in mind, again, the glutes, the core, the thighs, especially when you're doing the deeper stances, also your lower back. But something else I want you to think about is, I'm going to introduce this pretty early, but pressure, right? Pressure and breathing. So again, if you look at the video about synchrony, I talked about the kendo idea of Kigen Taichi, right? So that's the idea of your upper body, lower body, and your breathing all being in one motion. So what I'd like to do with this one is also kind of think about how to engage your breathing and how to engage your pressure as you move, especially early on. One thing you can start with is actually doing this without a sword. The reason I'm going to do this is it's a little bit easier to feel it when you don't have a sword, versus actually if you do have a sword, you actually use it as almost like a conduit, and if you don't understand it, it kind of like dissipates. If that doesn't make sense, that's fine. But what I like to do first is what we just did last time, right? So let's do sliding forward. Again, Suriyashi if you're into the kendo term, just because it's a little bit easier. Let's just talk about sliding forward, right? So if we're doing this, right, so again, just slide, slide. Now you can do this obviously, so I'll do it a few different times. Again, like I do with my students, is like exhibit A, B, and C if there's more, but usually it's not A. So exhibit A, right, also sliding back. Now notice, my foot did stay down, so that wasn't wrong. Exhibit B, right, exhibit C, right. Now, with that, I kind of like increased the pressure a little bit with each time. So the first one, like all the pressure was dropped, right? So I wasn't controlling anything. It was just like, all right, I'm moving through the world without really thinking. I'm not thinking about my muscle groups, not really, right? Second time around, it was like, all right, think a little bit about the muscle groups, right? Like, all right, I'm thinking about the muscle groups. Nothing is technically wrong if I do this. No one may notice, right? Versus the third one had a little bit more oomph in it, just because thinking about pressure in your breathing, right? So I didn't want to overdo it, right? But another way you could have done C is right? Right? So I want to do that a little bit more with you guys first. I'm actually going to talk about this in the stance-focused video, but let's just talk a little bit more about that pressure, right? So the kind of way you can engage with it. So one thing I like to do is, again, first of all, when you're in chianse, feel it, right? So chianse is not a stance to just like kind of chill in, right? No stance should be just chilled in. Versus this one, you should feel the glutes, you should feel the thighs, you should think, you know, all this stuff, right? So if I'm here, I'm not like, right? Everything is not taught, but I'm very aware of it. Another note that kind of might help you kind of figure this out is, so Musashi said, right? Now obviously I didn't have the chance to talk with Musashi because that would have been awesome, although we probably wouldn't have been able to understand each other. But, so the idea is actually keep your shin bone, so again the shin bone of your front foot, completely vertical, right? It's almost like you're going to try to knee something. Now that's kind of my own flavor on it. So when you move, almost like you're on knee something, right? I believe also Master Bergman, again just to lay things down, so Chief Master Bergman in the Northeast also mentioned this idea, I believe. I think he's the one who introduced it to me, so full disclosure. But what I like to do is think about all of these things just holding it. Now when you start moving with it, don't worry as much for the first couple rounds, right? Think about one or two things, if that. Think about one thing, maybe two things. So for now, so as just holding it, glutes, thigh, lower core, lower back, the shin bone completely upright, my shoulders square, my chin slightly up, slightly tucked back, so I can see everything. And if I'm holding a stance, hold the sword properly. But for now, I just want you to hold it here, right? So either you can have like the stand kind of like taekwondo-y kind of position. Actually, I think we also did this in Gumdo when we're doing higher level stuff. Here, right? Just hold the stance. Now you might notice, and I mentioned this in the past, my stance is a little bit different from the Federation chianse, just so you can keep that in mind. So you might do things differently. So notice that my stance is completely parallel. The Federation lets you kick that heel in a little bit. Now I talk about why I don't particularly do this because it engages some of the more lower muscle, like the smaller muscle groups. That's not going to promote longevity occasionally. So I'm kind of cemented in this. So unfortunately, this is going to be something that if you do want to, again, keep things in mind, just keep in mind this is something that I do. You do not need to replicate this because it is, strictly speaking, not canonical, although I do believe it's good. But, so what we could do is just, again, just feel it, right? And from here, breathe, right? So you're not breathing, right? It's also not, although that's closer, oddly enough. Think about your breathing here, deep breathing, right? So core breathing as opposed to light breathing. Try to suck the air, like drag it through your core. So your core should be like almost like you're like a furnace in here. So here, right? You kind of feel like you're almost gonna hear the difference between and right. So I'm going to try to ki from each of these three positions, right? So that might be a little bit harder to kind of hear through the microphone. But again, so top, sideways, and then core. Right? Makes sense? So as you move, right? So you're not trying to just be like, right? So you don't want to be top, you don't want to be sideways, you want to be like deep in your core, right? So as I'm here, what I like to do is actually use both hands. Also, I'm trying to shove, right? So like where my stomach is, right? So here, pushing. So what I'm going to do, as I slide forward, I'm going to do a little bit of a flourish, just kind of get my, my energy going, right? So as I move forward, first couple times, just move forward, try to get used to the idea of, again, muscle groups and all that kind of stuff, just, right? Same thing going back. Right? Then, as you get, again, more comfortable and you don't have people crossing this sidewalk just looking at you like you're insane, shouting at a cell phone, you can also start to engage your ki. So again, think about where you feel the breath originating when you ki, right? So deep, right? So like you're, again, like furnace one, almost like operatic, right? So if I'm here, so again, so I'm going to try, I think you guys get the idea, right? I'm not going to try like in high, sideways, deep. All of that I'm going to try from, again, my core, right? So from here, as you move forward, right? So feel everything going forward. Right? Sliding back. Again, you can kind of like here. Notice that I'm kind of pushing here, right? So it's almost like I'm going to pomse. So here. Make sense? I'm sure our neighbors really love that. But that's going to be something that's going to be really important, right? So it's not just for ki. It's not just for sounding intimidating, right? This is something that if you kind of get the idea and the feel for it, you're gonna get quite a lot from it, right? So for example, as you're moving through the world, you can think about yourself as a top breather or a sideways breather, which is better, by the way, just because that's just how you can control your breathing a little better, versus a core breather, right? Now, if you are, this is gonna make me sound insane again, if you are sensitive to pressures, right? So if you're sensitive to being able to understand someone's intentions and all kinds of fun stuff, as you move through the world, you can kind of tell by the way they hold their breath, right? So how they breathe. Top, they're not very conscious, right? Sideways, more so. Deep core, they probably did martial arts, right? Or they have trained in some way to be able to control their pressure, which does take a lot. So it's just a fun thing you can kind of introduce to yourself as you move through the world. Is like, all right, like I need like a glass of water or some kind of vending machine. Let me just go back down. But as I do so, think about the glutes, the core, all that fun stuff as I move. But also think about my breathing, right? So deep breathing here, right? Now obviously don't be like very dramatic, right? So if like you're going through the hallway and people are like, hey, and like, oh, that might be a bit too much. But be very aware of this as you move through the world, because this is going to, first of all, make you more aware. It's going to keep your body more aware, and also it's going to have a whole bunch of different effects that you may not initially know. But again, this is kind of like the gateway to kind of understanding pressures and stuff like that. I might eventually actually make a video about that, to kind of like dive a little more into the idea of pressure. But for now, think of it associated with breathing. So we just talked about, again, breathing, engaging sort of muscle groups as we move. Notice so far I didn't talk about the dimensions of the stance yet, right? I did not say, oh, from here, have one foot over, 1 foot up, stay on the ball of the feet, you're done, right? All I did was like, all right, so walk naturally. I'm walking naturally. Like, all right, now try to keep things parallel. All right, I'm going to try to keep things parallel. All right, now think about glutes and core. All right, I'm going to try to keep it. Eventually, they're going to kind of figure out for themselves a good distance. Now, the dirty little secret is for every martial arts out there, martial artists out there, there is an individual Chianse, so our walking stance. It is going to be different for every single person because no people are completely alike, maybe except identical twins, but their body motions might be different. But anyway, so the canonical way of doing it is more like the width of your foot over, the height of your foot forward, staying on the ball of your feet, and maybe tuck that back foot in a little bit so that your heels are kind of on the same line, but you're here, right? So that's the more canonical. The way that I do it, if I'm like just trying to be sciencey, is 1 foot over, 1 foot up, ball of the feet, just keep it parallel. Or, again, this is the stance distance video that I talked about. From here, just push yourself forward. Again, feel your belly fire, right? So breathe, push, 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 catch yourself, right? So again, here, lean, again, not lean this way, right? So lean your core, and as you lean your core, your body has to compensate, so you're going, oh, So the first couple times you might be overshot, you might be undershot, but as you do it over and over again, you're going to eventually settle into a good individualized Chianse. But with that in mind, so let's keep going, right? So if we're here, so we just talked about io peggy, right? So that's going to be front back cut. It's going to be forward, back, right? So notice this is going to be a double cut. I should actually be using my sword. I'll do it soon. But for now, it's just like io peggy, right? Forward, back. Now, this is going to be vaguely similar to if you've done kendo, hayai suguri, right? It's going to be a little bit different. This is going to be 2 individual shots, but the footwork is going to be very similar if you want to go really, really fast, right? It's Now, I believe like in hayai suguri, you kind of like do this kind of thing, which is going to be a little bit different. But the idea is forward, back. Now, I'm also going to introduce Sadan Pegi, so 4 directional cut. And obviously, this is going to be forward, back, left, right. Right? Now, the reason I'm going to do this first without sword is I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the breathing, forward, back, left, and right. Right? So if I'm going forward, push. Going back again, activate the glute, push back. Now, it's going to look a little bit weird, but it's okay. I'm going to move sideways. So notice what my feet are doing. I'm, right? I'm trying to push here, and then also, you can also do if you want. Notice I'm not doing, right? So that's obviously first level. Second level, right, I'm sliding, slippery sliding. This one is going to be a little bit different. This is push, right? I'm trying to dispatch. Someone's too close, dispatch. Someone's trying to cut me, I want to evade, sidestep. Someone's cutting, evade, sidestep. That's the purpose of these, right? This is not intended to be, all right, you had 2 directional cuts. Let's do 4, yay. Let's do 8, right? Because that is a thing that you could do. I believe it goes this way first. I think I'm stealing that from kendo. But like, all right, so like, okay, you could do that, but without any intentionality behind it, without any purpose behind it, it's fancy footwork, right? Like, all right, io peggy, this is fun. Oh, sadan peggy, look out, right? Versus, all right, someone's just out of range, right? Dispatch. Someone that's too close, you still want to dispatch them, but you want to get far enough away that you can cut, but they can't. Push. Someone's close enough to scrape your eye, evade. Someone's close enough, evade, right? So notice my footwork is so much cleaner because there's the imminent threat of being dispatched, right? So I'm about to die, or I'm about to dispatch, right? So be nice about the way to verbalize all this stuff. Yeah, so have that intentionality, right? So forward, I'm advancing, back up, right? This is going to happen a lot. Sidestep, right? So obviously, eventually you want to sidestep forward, but for now, oh shoot, someone's coming in, right? Someone's coming in, right? So keep that in mind as you go through, right? So again, always have a purpose as you go through these things, right? So again, you might be thinking, like, all right, you talk about the purpose for a lot of things. You may have talked about the purpose of Paosangse, for example, like Gumgai don't give Paosangse, which is mostly a balance exercise, at least for me. But always have a reason for going through something. Now with a sword, right? So if we're here, right? So if we're going to do iyo pegi, right? So you're going forward and you're going back. All you're going to do is senkuts, right? So notice this is the first time you're moving, again, 2 feet, right? As you do a cut. You're no longer just turn cut like you did in Teidose, you're moving both feet. So this is the point where I might break it down a lot more, right? So I introduced the idea of moving without the sword, right? So to kind of get a pretty good, idea. Putting a sword in someone's hands as they cut is probably one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people, right? So what I might do is actually break it down into two-stage cuts. So what I'm going to do facing this way, just kind of see a little bit better. So if I'm here, as I prepare for my cut, as I step my foot forward, prepare, right? As I slide my back foot in, I'm going to execute my cut. Same thing going back. As they come in, step back, prepare, step back, cut. Now obviously you can do the same thing with the others, right? So going this way, as I step, I'm going to prepare. As I cut, I bring it in, and step, cut. Now, that is something you can absolutely do with your students, especially if they're brand new, because that's going to introduce the idea of, again, it's 2-stager. Now, how many stages do you think there's actually going to be when you're trying to attack? 1, right? And this is going to be actually something directly from Master Kim, so I can say it's canonical. It is all cuts should be a 1-stage motion. So it should not be bun, bun. It should be bun, bun, right? So for here, you could again, 1, 2. One thing that I like to do at this stage as well is I'm going to actually start my prep a little bit early, so notice I haven't stepped yet. Start the prep. As it gets high enough, I'm just going to push my body underneath it to finish the prep. Now that's going to be a higher level technique. Right, so Exhibit A, right, versus Exhibit B. Pushing up. So notice I forced myself underneath the sword, and it was a little bit faster, and also wasted less energy on my part. So that's something that you can do. It's a little bit weirder going back, right? Because the idea of going back, you probably need to completely prepare first, and then drive back with the cut, which will give away that you're trying to cut. So it's a little bit weirder going back, also for a side as well. But as you're going forward, absolutely try that, right? So start, almost like you're trying to stab them in the face, cut, right? It's actually going to be very similar to, sort of, right? So Yedo 9, if you've learned Yedo 9, right? So thrust, coming in, cut. Vaguely similar, vaguely, just to kind of have full motion for all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so keep that in mind as you do it. Now obviously when you do Sadon Pegi, everything according to the Federation is center cut, right? Now, one thing that I'm going to do, again, this is side note, so this is extra, right? So think about for the side to side, right? Now, if I'm trying to dispatch someone, so if you're the camera, I'm trying to dispatch you as I move, if I do a center cut as I cut in here, what's going to happen, right? So if I embed the tip into the cranium, as I keep moving, it's going to keep moving that way. It's no longer going to cut, right? Because now my motion is not the same as my cut, right? So if I'm moving to the left, I'm going to be cutting from the right. So without moving, it's going to be a right cut. As I move to the left, right cut. Make sense? So that way, your horizontal motion can accommodate the downward motion that you're trying to cut into the person. Same thing on the other side, right? So if I'm here, center cut would look like this. Left cut, as I go to the right. Make sense? Now, this is going to be something that's more of a nitpicky thing that I like to see in my students, but something that is absolutely not required for Federation Gumdosa. one drill that you can do is when we finish, so we just did our paosongse, right? We landed. So normally we say apro, duiro, charo, uro, right? What you can do now is after you kind of do like, all right, so remember these 4 directions, let's play with that, right? So like, all right, so from here, what I want you to do is apro, 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 uro, like, uro, charo, charo, apro, uro. It's like, oh no, that wasn't uro, right? So that'll be kind of a fun thing for you to do, especially if you have younger children, or at least younger students, right? Because it can be more of a game, right? Almost like Simon Says. The second drill that I'd like you to try is think about the way you breathe as you do your form, right? Now, technically, right? So you should only have, you should only breathe between at defenses, right? So for example, in form 1, we cut, we're in defense, now you can breathe. And until you do the very end here, you're not allowed to breathe, so that's a bad example. But according to the forms, you can only breathe at defenses. But if you do not do that, right, so maybe just as a drill, think about going through your form, actively think about your breathing, right? So a lot of times we're taught breathe in as you prepare, breathe out as you cut, right? The biggest part of that is make sure you do breathe out when you cut, but you don't always need to breathe in when you prepare. That's going to leave you open a little bit more, so as you get more and more comfortable with your particular lung capacity, breathe in a little bit less often, but you can breathe out as often as you want, right? So long as your lungs can handle it. But if you do 1 breath per cut, try it this way, right? So think about like, all right, let me go through my form, top breath, right? So up here, like every time. You're gonna notice, you're gonna strain your chest a lot more, right? Versus if you have a more like horizontal breath, like, that might almost have an open mouth, like, you're going to have a lot more oxygen going in there, but again, you're going to be kind of, it's not controlled, right? So it's kind of like a big bellow of breath versus controlled, right? So notice I already have my like shoulders prepped, right? So, make sense? So go through your form, think about those 3 styles of breathing, and again, see how it influences how you cut. Do you cut more effectively from a top, horizontal, or deep cut? Do you move more effectively? So you might do differently than what I'm expecting, right? So maybe you're someone who can, from that horizontal breathing, can do a lot more power, right? Or you're someone with your more top heavy, you can do maybe a little more quick, right? You're a little bit quicker to move one direction to the other. So try it for yourself, right? So again, I'm obviously very biased. I'm going to say you should think about the belly breath, but I could be wrong, and it's worth trying out. So with that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, keep training, and try different ways of breathing. So long as you breathe, don't stop breathing, but keep breathing, but do so safely. Haidong!